Does God care about small places? How can we faithfully serve Christ in a rural context? What is the future of the church in rural America? The Rural Ministry Podcast deals with questions like this and much more in the hopes of bringing practical resources and inspiring stories to help the church flourish in rural communities. Dr. Charlie Cotterman is the Executive Director at the Center for Rural Ministry, Assistant Professor of Biblical Studies at Grove City College, and the pastor of a rural church in Oil City, Pennsylvania. Join the conversation as we journey into the good things God is doing in small places. All right, well, welcome to another episode of the Rural Ministry Podcast, where we talk about the unique challenges and joys of living and doing ministry in rural places. I'm your host, Garrett Heath, Director of Media and Communications at the Center for Rural Ministry at Grove City College, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Charlie Cotterman. Charlie is the Executive Director at the Center for Rural Ministry, Assistant Professor of Biblical Studies at Grove City College, and also the pastor of Oil City Vineyard Church in Oil City, PA. Today, we are continuing our series entitled Caring for Pastors, and we have special guest Kaitlyn Wood with us. Kaitlyn was born and raised in upstate New York. She earned a BS in Communication Theory at Eastern University and an MA studying religion, media, and culture at RPI. And in 2015, she discerned the call to vocational ministry and entered Northeastern Seminary in Rochester, New York. And as a pastor in upstate New York, she worked with her congregation to bring about transformation, a renewed vision, and a heart for their region. Kaitlyn is also passionate about equipping pastors and churches for holistic revitalization, which was the focus of her DMin project at Northeastern. She currently works as the Director of Church Health and Flourish Movement with ECO. So Kaitlyn, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're glad you could join us. I was thinking as we were prepping for the show, how one of the joys of the work we get to do is getting to know new people and getting to meet denominational leaders, and especially these denominational partnerships that ECO is part of with the Center for Rural Ministry. It's been fun to get to know you a little bit, and I'm looking forward to hearing more of your story today. So maybe that's where we start. If you could just, Gary just gave us a brief bio. You can even tell by your bio, there's a lot of life there between the pieces. I'd love to just have a snapshot of kind of how God got a hold of your heart for ministry, and kind of, did you grow up in the church, that kind of thing?
Sure. So I'll try to condense it down because there is a whole lot of life and detours and twists and turns. But I grew up, my parents were co-pastors growing up. So I think I was born on a Thursday, and my first Sunday in church was when I was like 4 days old, probably. So I've never known a life outside of church. I was one of 7 kids, like just a really strange, an oddity in like suburban America where we were. And so I grew up in the church. It's really funny when people find out that both my parents were pastors. They'll often say like, okay, so, and you survived and you still enjoyed the church, like you still came back to work for the church. And I think that there was definitely a season where I was like, that's not my path at all. I wanted to be more outside of the church, kind of doing some thinking and teaching about church, but I really didn't want to do vocational ministry. And so it took a while to get there. And so it wasn't until I was in my 30s that I ended up in full-time vocational ministry. So there's a lot of life in the middle there, but I grew up in the church, and I've loved the church. And I think one of the most relevant pieces for this conversation is like watching my parents co-pastor just taught me, I think, a lot about pastoral formation, pastoral personalities, skills, gifts. Watching them revitalize and love a church and a community was really, really obviously formational for me. And then studying in my graduate program, studying like modern religious movements, going, what is happening in these places that we could bring to smaller churches, right? Like I just had this idea in my head, this like stubborn belief that if we could get the right information and the right training and the right equipping to these small disconnected churches, they could flourish just like,
Sure.
any of these big new movements that were coming out in the early 2000s. And so
Mhm.
that was kind of the focus of my early academic work. And then it turned out that I actually just wanted to be a pastor and not be a professor of religion. And so ended up there. But yeah, so that's kind of just
Yeah.
been, there's a deep love for the church from the moment
Yeah.
I was born that's carried me through till now.
Yeah, no, that's so cool. And I love that you have that kind of academic bent and the pastoral heart. And I'm just gonna give you a shout out here. There's a book coming out that I'm, by the way, currently like working my way through as a pre-reader. Good.
Yay.
So be looking for that, listeners.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm excited to, this is like totally off topic. My mom was always trying to like write a book or have something. And I feel like that was something that was passed on to me, but never, I thought it would happen in an academic sense. So then when I became a pastor, I was like, that's probably a life that's not going to happen. And so, so I'm really excited that.
Yeah. Do you know the title of
We
it?
are hoping that it's going to be called Called to Cultivate.
Okay.
And it's, directed towards church leadership teams, church leaders, and really helping them rethink the way and reframe the way they approach church health.
Yeah. Well, that's so cool. I'm so glad you get to do that. And honestly, that strikes me as like how God works. Like he's so often like, you think like this thing's dead that I wanted. And God's like, well, I'm going to revive it in my way, my time. It's so good.
Yeah, actually you're going to do this thing that I promised. You're not going to do it your way.
Yeah. Funny how that works.
It's so funny how that works.
Say, just hearing a snapshot of your story, I'm always encouraged to see PKs who love God and who love the church. So I just want to give you a shout out as a pastor myself, right? And a father of 4, that I hope they love God and love the church. Like, so always good to see.
There's a couple of us, I think last count, I've met and connected with like 4 or 5 people who were children of co-pastors growing up that really 2 of us actually, our director of church planting is also the child of co-pastors. And so I'm like, there's something that's like another PhD that needs to happen, right? It's like, what's the secret sauce there?
Yeah. Wow. Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right. So let's jump into some of these topics that we want to talk about, especially related to kind of, I know you're over congregational health. So you're thinking about the ecosystem at the church, but I know you also interact with pastors and you've been a pastor. So you've seen both from the pastoral side, the lay side. So any of those perspectives, I think, would apply to any of these questions. But as you've, now had a chance to interact with a lot of churches in your denominational role, what have you found surprising about what the kind of average pastor is facing? And surprising maybe in a good way, and maybe surprising in a like, wow, that we need to do something about this. There's some hard things they're facing, and it's not just one, it's like many.
Yeah. I think for just the average pastor, I think the thing that surprised me the most when I was pastoring, and I'm in New York, and we're part of a more evangelical movement, but in New York, grew up in New York, right? So I'm kind of like in this tension culturally, politically. And so when I was pastoring, I think the thing that was most surprising to me was how much I would be dealing with just diverse perspectives, conflicting opinions about things that have nothing to do with the church. Like you certainly could not have prepared me for the fact that I was getting emails and phone calls about what so-and-so said on Facebook kind of thing, right? So that's was a surprise as a pastor. And I think that that's been true as I watch, watch pastors figure that out, even in other places that you would think would be less diverse thought-wise, is just how much time is spent and how much pressure is put on pastors to be able to navigate such diverse people, thoughts, opinions. And how do you do it well, right? Like, how do you keep the main thing, but also actually, like, it does matter the way we talk to people online, and it does matter the way we present ourselves. And I don't want to police your language, but I also do really want you to represent Christ well in this way in the church. And so that I think was a weird surprise to me when I was pastoring, for sure. Yeah. I think the thing that surprises me most, I love being surprised when I go to churches. And so part of my job is that churches might call us in and say, we need help with this. We're in decline. We're not sure if we're going to be able to keep going, or whatever it is that they're saying, whatever it is that they're facing. And so part of my job is that I get to enter into that space with them. And I have such a deep love for the local church, and especially small churches, that there's a joke in our office that I think about applying for every church that I go to visit and work with, because I'm just like, I would love to work here. It's like there's something about the small church and the local church. But I get surprised almost every time, because I might have a preconceived idea based on whatever information they've sent us and whatever pre-work we've read and all of these things. And I walk in and it's like, there's just this wonderful group of humans that are doing their best or trying their hardest, and so I think I'm surprised constantly by the church, but in all different ways. And usually it's for the better. I love walking into churches going, this is not at all what I thought we were going to be doing, but let's rearrange and do something else.
Yeah. I love that, because, you get these reports, you read about it, but it's one thing to read about a church on paper. It's another thing to show up and have a potluck with them, or worship with them, and walk their community with them. And it's completely different. And you just see, because I think it's partially because a lot of us, we don't appreciate what God's doing in our everyday life.
Yeah.
But someone that comes in with their eyes open is like, do you see what God's doing?
Yeah.
So,
well, it's easy to look, I think, at the rural church, small town churches from the outside. And it's easy to notice all the flaws from that perspective, especially in our culture. But when you're in it, when you're invested in it, when you're among the people, part of the flock, right, there is that beauty that comes through those relationships, I think, that is hard. It's impossible maybe to see from the outside. Right. Yeah. So, and I think that's the affinity that we probably share with you, is this love for small town rural churches. Right. So that being said, do you have have you noticed in your role, any trends, so to speak, that would be across, the rural church?
I'm not sure that I would call them trends right now. I think one of a challenge that's not surprising to me in as I look at churches is that one of our biggest challenges as a denomination is getting pulpits filled in small churches and in rural churches. And so there is a difficulty. One of the things that we constantly wrestle with is how do we get people to understand that it's a calling to go to a small and rural church. Yeah. And so I'm not necessarily sure that it's a trend. Maybe it's a trend that I'm trying to start, but I would love for small and rural churches, especially, to really get a sense of this ownership of their congregation. I think that exists in smaller churches in a way that it doesn't exist in bigger churches. That this sense of we know who we are, we know what we were planted for, we know why we exist, we know our history. We joke all the time, there's always a couple of people there who know where the bodies are buried, right? They know the history of the church going back generations. And when you have that kind of shared ownership of the congregation, of the church, of the mission, of the vision, you can withstand pastoral transitions and pastoral changes. You can weather even times without a pastor in the congregation. So that to me is maybe not necessarily a trend, but it's a trend I would love to see is more and more teaching small churches. You don't have to wait for, it's great to have a pastor. We're not saying you don't need one. But teaching small churches and all churches that there should be just this shared ownership of the church and its identity and its mission together, that's carried out regardless of whether there's someone in the pulpit. Because I think that would be something that would be really, really helpful. The other thing that I would love to see in small churches as a trend is like just getting creative and risk taking. And I see that in some of our churches, especially small churches that have some younger leadership, whether it's pastors or elders. But there's a really unique flexibility in the small church. You have much less structure, much less people and red tape to get through. So the ability to like take risks and get creative to try to meet your community or to try to minister to people is really exciting to watch for me. I love when I get to see our small churches try something. And you're like, that might not feel like a big deal to you, but that's a huge, like our big churches could never do something like that. It would take them too long to get approval, like it's so
For
exciting to watch you.
Yeah. No, those are both great points. And I think they're connected because I honestly think you can be creative if you know who you are and if you know your space. And I'm a big proponent for knowing the history of your church, your town, your context. And I'm just going to give a shout out about our conference this year, Cultivating Faithful Presence. We're
Shameless
going
plug.
diving in. That's right. Be looking. Because that's what we're going to dive into. We're going to have a few historians, one of whom is my mentor, Scott Sundquist. He's going to help us think about church history and rootedness, but also Mark Graham here. And we're going to have speakers that talk about small town attentiveness, because I think you're exactly right, Kaitlyn, that like that kind of knowledge is so important. And I think it's connected to the creativity that
It absolutely is. And I think too, it's like, so we have this process that we do. It's what the book is based on, called Cultivating Flourishing Congregations. And in part of it, we ask the church leadership to gather the whole congregation. And the first thing we ask them to do is like create a timeline, a church timeline, and not just events, but or milestones, but then we ask them like, can you identify which of these might have been turning points or really significant moments? And then we ask them to say, okay, so now together, can you identify what are the really important lessons that you learned from this? What are the values that you gained from that moment? And how do they show up still now, right? And there's something about a congregation learning how to tell their story and talk about hard things, right? Some of those things might be hard things that were significant moments, and some of them might be really good things, really positive things. And I think that there is just something about a church knowing its identity, good and bad, knowing its history, that gives it confidence to move forward in risky ways. Good risk, not like risky.
Right. Sure. Absolutely. Hey, you're talking to a vineyard guy. One of the things you hear in the vineyard all the time is faith is spelled RISK. All right, so I'm like right there with you. Okay, so you just were talking about how congregations need to have a sense of who they are, because there might be times, especially for small ones, they're without a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
But now I want to kind of turn the conversation slightly, because I don't know if you know this about the Center for Rural Ministry, but we started in 2019 with a different grant. We have the Project on Rural Ministry, and we only really cared for pastors. We weren't thinking about congregations. So we spent about 5 years thinking about pastoral flourishing. And if the congregation flourished, which we thought it would if the pastor was flourishing, great, but that wasn't where our time was really spent. Now we're kind of trying to think holistically about it. And I think in your role, you're working with congregational health, but of course, the pastoral health is involved. And can you talk to me about how you create this ecosystem where there's flourishing on both sides, and where, and what the connection is between pastoral health and congregational health and vice versa?
Yeah, I think there's been so much conversation, argument about like, is the church too corporate? Do we talk too much about leadership? And I will say, I don't think certainly the right mix of leader, the perfect leader, perfectly healthy leader doesn't guarantee a church will flourish, but having an unhealthy leader can almost always guarantee that a church won't. And so we at ECO, we say like, we exist to build flourishing churches that make flourishing disciples, but they have to be led by flourishing leaders, right? Like that, there's a 3-part kind of harmony there. So we want to get all of them. And the flourishing leaders who should be flourishing disciples themselves as well, right? So we have to like really think about it holistically. I think that, so my demon dissertation project was all about leaders in spaces, small churches, legacy churches during revitalization and things like that. And I think one of the things that I gathered from that research and from that time together was really like the loneliness of pastors,
Yeah.
and how there was a lot of times where they just felt like it was kind of like them against the world, as they're trying to lead change, as they're trying to lead revitalization efforts, especially. And there is, I think, a need for pastors to be connected and in community, and in deep community. I think it's Ruth Haley Barton in Transforming Leadership talks about like the most, like, we bring our whole selves, our whole transforming selves to every organization that we lead. And so the places where we are being transformed and growing and healthy, those things will automatically leak into the congregation. But the places where we are deformed, unformed, refuse to like expose to other people, those also make their way into the congregation or into the organizations we lead. And so if we are, as pastors, not connected to people, not known deeply, vulnerably, by someone, I think that is probably one of the biggest health challenges for pastors is this lack of being known, lack of being seen, lack of being accountable, for you know, in a million different ways. But I think that that's probably one of the biggest like red flag dangers for me as small church pastors. It's easy to be isolated.
Yeah. Is there anything that congregations can do like to help their pastor, or is it only the pastor? Like, is there like, how do they help? Like, is there anything that can be done?
It's a great question. What can congregations do? I mean, I would say, first of all, small churches, it's so hard. But if there is a team of leadership, people in the congregation who are able to step up and willing, that are able to say, hey, you need to take time off. I can't tell you how many times I meet small church pastors who preach 49 or 50 weeks a year, Sundays a year. And I'm not saying that pastors should take 6 weeks off every year and just disappear. I know some people feel really strongly about not doing that. But when I was a small church pastor, it was one of my intentional sort of acts was that I would sit in the church on a Sunday morning while someone else was preaching. So I was sitting under someone else's preaching. But I think that churches can really say like, hey, we don't want you to be the only voice. We don't want you to be the professional Christian, the expert. We want you to take some time off. We want you to take some time away. Who are you asking questions during the annual reviews that aren't just about attendance or budget, but about like, who are you connected with? Who knows you well? How do you spend time with them? What does it look like for you to get away and take a break? Like those sorts of things, I think, are ways that churches can build a culture that kind of expects that from their pastors.
Yeah. No, that's good. And I like what you said about the kind of sitting under someone else. One of the practices that we've had for the last 10 years at OCV is just about every month, like someone would speak from the beginning that's a layperson in the church, because we really felt like people needed to hear from more than just me or the pastoral staff. They needed to hear from their peers who were kind of, you know, going to their work 9 to 5 every day and trying to follow Jesus there.
Yeah.
So it's been a really healthy practice for us. In fact, right now is the first time in my pastoral ministry of 10 years here at Oil City Vineyard where I've been preaching like 7 straight weeks as our associate pastor's on paternity leave. And I have this series that I really want to hammer into, and I'm feeling it. Like it's going to be 8 weeks before I get a break, and I'm starting to feel it. So shout out. You start
to feel a little weary
every 8 weeks.
That you really do. You will start to feel a little weary. I think you point out something good too, is like to have lay leaders. This is something we intentionally build into our processes. It's like the pastor shouldn't be the only one leading initiatives or change or anything like that. So in old models of church kind of health revitalization, it's like the pastor is the linchpin, the center spoke. And so back in the day, ECO used to have a process where it was like they would teach the pastor stuff, and then the pastor would have to go back and implement it at the church on their own. And that, I guess that makes sense, right? But it often turned into conflict where the pastor was standing on their own and everyone was kind of shouting back, and we became the scapegoats a little bit. And so what we've done is we really say, if you want to enter this process, this flourishing congregations process, it's pastor plus at least 3 to 5 other people, lay leaders, elders, staff, whatever, but people who are going to come around them, and they're going to do the learning together and the implementing together and the tackling of any hard things together. And I think that that's another thing, is like for pastors to just realize, like, to be insistent about them not being a lone ranger when it comes to leadership.
Yeah. And that reminds me of what Steve McVeigh said at the conference last year, when Dirt Roads Network works with revitalization small churches. They only do it if they can get the board involved. Because really, as most small town pastors know, especially if you're in a movement that switches pastors in and out a good bit, like it is so hard to have the kind of capital it takes to have revitalization by yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that will burn out a pastor really, really quickly. And I would say there's The Making of a Leader. Robert Clinton talks about like finishing well. And I would say, just from a non-congregational side of things and from a pastoral formation side, the one thing that I know about or have learned about pastoral health long-term is really like being super, super, super aware of your own wiring and your own areas of growth and your own, what does it look like for you to finish well? What does it look like for you to get to the end of pastoring with your family intact, your faith intact, your soul intact, right? And not to like fall over the finish line. But to have that picture in your head and have that picture in your mind of what it looks like to finish well, and then work backwards and go, okay, so I know this is how I'm wired, and this is where I'm kind of like a little deficient, or I need to grow. So these are the types of people I need to bring around me. And that's something that I don't think a congregation can do for a pastor. That's something pastors really need to. It's hard. Sometimes we come out of seminary like, we know all the answers, we know what to do. And that's, not healthy.
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to jump to another question, because this kind of ties into it, because I think one of the things that denominations can do is actually provide pastors with coaching and people who can just help them have that conversation even with themselves, and help them process that, right? Where it's like, just tell me about how you process a difficult conversation, or tell me about what systems you have in place that are helpful and what ones seem broken, or, where do you feel strong? Where do you feel like sometimes you just need someone to intentionally ask you those things?
Yeah.
And denominations can provide that.
Yeah.
So I think that's one way denominations can help. But I'm interested if you think of other ways that denominations can come around small town pastors specifically, but also congregations, which is, here's why I ask this. I feel like so many times at the national denominational level, small town pastors feel unseen, and they don't see themselves on the platform at the national conference. They don't see themselves on the denominational podcast. They don't see themselves anywhere. They see all the really flashy places and pastors. So it's not like they're hearing from themselves usually. Now, you are a little bit of different, right? Because you were in a small church. So this is good. Props to you. But like generally, so what can denominations do to not only help them, but also let them just know they're seen?
Yeah, that's it's the flag I'm constantly waving in eco offices. And I don't, not that I need to, but I do just want to make sure that the small church and the small church pastor are constantly in front of the eco people as we think about new initiatives or whatever it is. I will say that, I was a pastor of a small church under 130 when they invited me to preach at our national gathering, and, felt like, this is crazy. I've never spoken to 1,500 people before, like that was wild. I was like, some people do this every week. But I just, it didn't compute for me, but it felt really important and really huge that the denomination was willing to platform and, like you said, like tell the stories of someone who was not leading a big church. And I will say the response that I got, there were several large church pastors who came afterwards and was like, this was so good. And we feel almost convicted because you're seeing more adult baptisms than we saw in our, multi-thousand person church last year. And it was really, really healthy. So that was really great. And I do feel like ECO kind of puts their money where their mouth is, so to speak, in that way. But one of the things I'm always trying to do is how do we tell stories of healthy, small things? Yeah. How do we, whether that's the videos that we do of like spotlight on churches or pastors at our national gathering, or it's bringing people, like you said, on a podcast or whatever, but how do we talk about the faithful small places? And then on a bigger level, I always felt like, because we talk, especially ECO uses the word flourishing like all the time. And I think it's really easy to think that that's just like another way of saying big. And so we try to like make really explicitly clear that flourishing means fruitful, not large, right? And that in nature, there are so many, like everything grows according to their DNA. So some things are meant to be the size of an oak tree, and sometimes some things are really just meant to be like a rose bush or a tulip, and that's fine, right? Like it's like we grow according to our DNA when we know what our DNA is, and we can be fruitful in that way. And so we're constantly trying to reshape that expectation of that narrative, because I don't want small pastors to walk away from our national gathering or any of our other conversations feeling like they're a failure if their church isn't the size of someone else's. And I did have a small church pastor say to me when I first started a couple of years ago, if 40 people show up to a church plant the first week, we celebrate. But if 40 people show up to my church in rural Idaho, somehow I feel like I'm not doing enough. And I said, okay, well, let's not pin the two against each other, right? Like, let's think about how to celebrate what God's doing in your small church in Idaho the way we do. You're right. The way we do about 40 people showing up to a church plant, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great word.
It's a huge point. Isn't it funny too, Charlie, how often this comes up in these conversations? And I think because it is so real, like I would guess there's not a single small town rural pastor who doesn't have that thought occasionally, or even carries a guilt, with them, or feels they should be doing bigger and better things. Your word there, especially about fruitfulness, within the context of flourishing, I really, really love. I mean, as we're kind of running out of time here, as well, on that note, maybe even to your point on flourishing and fruitfulness, contextually, what would you have to say to that small town rural pastor who might be listening?
I would say, man, do the work of knowing yourself and your congregation, right? So know your story, know your shape, know your wiring, know your congregation. Be secure in what you're called to, and be confident in what God's called your congregation to, and then run from that, like run out of that, and just keep moving. Like be willing to get creative, be willing to take risks, be willing to do things, to release yourself from like, I'm not trying to be the church down the street. We always used to joke like the church down the street with the gym. Like most churches are never going to have a big gym, and that's okay. Like, so what can you do? And I didn't even have a parking lot. I didn't have parking. I'm a small city church, right? And so like, what is it that's unique about our people, our place, our moment, and be free from trying to be something else, and let yourself be whatever it is that God's called you and your congregation to be in this season. And that's really just, I think, hopefully freeing for pastors. It doesn't feel like there's a weight of like, I should, or I need to, or I should have. But instead to go, this is what I get to do with these people, or this is what God's calling and inviting us to right now.
So good. So good. And I'm 100% with you. That idea of being secure in who God has made you to be and called you to be and what he's called you to do. You will almost never see good leadership out of insecurity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Such a good word. I think that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for coming on, Kaitlyn.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
For sure.
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, it's such a unique perspective that you bring to. It's been a really good conversation. So thank you. And I think that's a wrap for this week's episode. Thank you all for listening as well. We hope this conversation has provided you with some encouragement, insight, maybe even practical idea for your own ministry context. Rural Ministry Podcast is part of the good work being done at the Center for Rural Ministry at Grove City College. If you found this helpful, there are a few free things you can do to help us out. First, you can share this episode with a friend or colleague who could benefit from it. Second, you can leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. This helps more people discover the show. And lastly, you can leave a comment or suggestion over on the episode page, the Center for Rural Ministry YouTube channel. We hope to get some good conversations started over there as well. So thanks again for listening, and you can learn more about our mission by visiting www.ruralministry.org. Have a great week.